Welcome to Chess to Impress. These are lessons for beginners who have just started playing chess and know the basic laws of the game. As we progress in the series, we will discover and talk about various themes that will help you build a strong base. Right now, we're going to talk about development. What is development? Getting your pieces out into the game is called development. The more pieces you have out, the more control of the board you'll have. This will help you take more of your opponent's pieces. Development is very important at the start of a chess game. The moves that white has played right now, as you can see on the screen, are called the 10 best moves of development. Right? This is just an example. You usually cannot do all of them, but if you should try to do as many as you can, right? But if you can try to do it. Like for example, if you just take a look at this position, like there's a saying in chess that we should always control the center. So these two pawns are consolidated, are there, they're sitting right there looking at the center, right? The most important d5 and the e5 squares on the other side of the board. Even the bishops, I love the bishops, right? Both of them are well developed, looking at the center. The knights as well, right? The knight on c3, the other knight on f3, even the queens developed so that the rooks are connected. The rooks are there in the center of the board, and the most important thing, we have successfully castled, right? Again, an example, we should try to get our pieces out in the game. Getting your pieces out in the game is known as development. Let's take a look at position number 2, right? If you just take a look at this position again, it's just for us to understand how important development is and the basics of the game. So my question to you is, what are some moves that white and black should play to complete their development, right? Which pieces are not developed? If I just evaluate this position, I can clearly see that my knight is still not developed, right? Everything else is pretty much fine. My bishop is developed, my knight is developed, my bishop is developed, the other queen sits strong on d2. But this minor piece, which is of vital importance, the knight on b1, is not developed. Now the question is, where do I develop the knight? Do I put my knight on a3, or do I use my knight and put this on c3? Think for a minute and try to understand what my question is. The answer is, you never move your knight on a3. Knight on the edge of the board makes no sense because they control less squares, and there's a usual saying in chess that the knight on the rim is dim. So always put your knights towards the center of the board. There's a reason, I'll explain why. Now imagine you put your knight on a3. The only number of squares that it does control, or the squares that it looks at, if you count them, it's only 4. Whereas when you put your knight at the center of the board, you just double the number of squares the knight controls. So this is another important thing that we just learned. When it comes to development, develop correctly. Don't just develop for the sake of developing. So yeah, the correct move is knight to c3. I think white is doing pretty much fine, apart from the fact that the rooks are not centralized. When I say the word centralized, they should be on e1 and d1, at least in the middle game, right? Rooks are strong pieces when they are centralized. Now let's talk about my second question, which is about the black's pieces, which are not developed. It is quite evident that we all know that black starts after white. So it's implied that white will sometimes have more pieces developed than black, and vice versa. So the bishop is not developed, the knight is not developed. So maybe let's just say I want to develop the knight. There's this thing that you should always develop your knight before the bishops when it comes to development. So again, the question is, where do you move your knight? a6, c6, you got it correct, right? You move your knight towards the center and not away from the center. Knight d7, you'd also say knight d7 is moving your knight at the center of the board, but knight d7 blocks the bishop from getting developed, right? It hampers bishop's development. So where do we develop our knight? We develop our knight on c6 and not on d7 or a6. Not on d7 because it hampers bishop's development, and not on a6 because it's just not good. like I explained a couple of minutes ago. So yeah, knight on c6. Now again I flip the board. We sometimes need to think both ways, right? So what do I do? I need to centralize my rooks. Easy peasy lemon squeezy. I use this rook. Where do I develop it? e1, because I need to use this square for the other rook. We do not take up other space. Next thing, which piece is yet to be developed? Okay, cool. I'll just play bishop d7. This move is quite simple, rook d1, and basically both the sides have completed their development. Maybe I can just play a6 now. The idea being is to push these pawns on the other side of the board to gain some space on the other side of the board. Alright, let's move on to position number 3. Now this is super important. This position is very important. Like I say, it's of vital importance. Why? Because let's discuss. Now if you just take a look at this, what are some of the development which has gone wrong? Some of the developmental mistakes that were made by white and black. Yeah, let's try to understand from the white side of the board. What mistakes has white made? Alright, the rooks and the knights should be centralized. They should be towards the center. So this knight, which is right here on a3, along with the rook, right, they're away. They're not towards the center. They're away from the center. So they're on the edge. So that's one mistake that white has done. Also, never move your side pawns. Avoid moving your side pawns as much as possible. If you have not seen my video on why you shouldn't, watch the pawn shield video, right? Because they shield your king. Once you like kind of move your pawns, your king, it can be exposed, right? It will be exposed. So two mistakes: the rook and the knight are on the edge. Side pawns have been pushed, but not the central pawns. You should ideally push your central pawns, right? That was lesson number 1. But the central pawns have not been pushed. The side pawns have been pushed. And also the bishops are blocked. Where is the activity? The bishops should be ideally on c4 or f4, but all the pawns, because of the pawns which have not been moved and the movement of the knight which is on e2, it does not allow the two bishops to be out in the game. That's where they should be, on c4, maybe g5, whatever, but they should be controlling the center and not away from the center. Alright, let's focus on black side of the board. Okay, you think for yourself, take a minute or two, what has black done and what are some of the principles that black has not followed when it comes to development. Alright, so the first thing is, if you move your king, you cannot castle. As you can see, the king on f8 has been moved. Ideally, it should be on e8, right? Once you move your king from its original square or from its starting position, the king cannot castle. So this is a very major mistake, right? You moved your king, cannot castle. Now, I think it's gonna get even worse. There's this knight on the edge of the board. The side pawns have been pushed. And also just take a look at the both bishops. Both these bishops are blocked, right? Both these bishops are blocked by the pawns, and as a result of which it is gonna cause major trouble for both the sides, right? We were just here to take this position as an example and understand the mistakes that we should not do when it comes to development. Alright, position number 4, easiest position of the lot. What are some good ways for white and black to finish their development? Alright, which pieces are not developed? Talk to the pieces, talk to yourself, talk to your pieces. They'll give you the answers. Knight on b1 is not developed, the bishop on c3 is not developed. So maybe I'll start with moving my knight, maybe developing my knight first. So I'll play knight on c3 again. Knight on a3 is a bad move, never move your knight on the edge. Knight on d2 is fine, but still it's not okay because it kind of blocks the bishop. So I do not like knight d2 or knight a3. You should move your knight on c3. Okay, let's not switch. Let's just try to think from here. Again, if the black king wants to castle, there should be no pieces in between, and also this knight has not been developed. So where do I move my knight? Maybe e7 is fine because this the bishop on c5 does not come in the way. So maybe I would place my knight on e7, or maybe knight to f6. Both the moves are okay. Maybe let's just play knight f6 because it controls more squares in the center. Now the bishop isn't developed, I need to develop my bishop. You can develop your bishop on d2, e3, g5, be careful. You cannot develop your bishop on f4. Why? Because the pawn's controlling it. So yeah, maybe I'll just play bishop g5, and then let's complete the development of the black's king. Black king can castle. I have just disabled the option, but yeah, you just remember this. Black king can definitely castle, or maybe for that matter, let's just move bishop e6. Cool. So these are some of the ways in which we should develop. Let's take a look at one more game. Maybe let's just see. Okay, yeah, just take a look at this position. White has sacrificed so many pawns, correct? Let's just go right from the beginning. Let's just take a look at this. E4, E5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop c4, bishop c5. White gave up a pawn. Why? Because he needs to develop with a tempo. A tempo in chess is when you develop while attacking your opponent's piece. Take a look at that. You develop, but you're developing, gaining your time, gaining some extra time by attacking their pieces. Now, wherever they go, you just keep developing. I am not cared about my pawns. I do not care about my pawns. I am interested in completing my development by removing all my pieces out. Takes queen b3. What does queen on b3 do along with the bishop? They create a battery. Where do they attack? They're attacking the f7 pawn, right? So they need to defend. Black needs to defend. Let's just imagine, or let's just say black played the move queen f6. What do? Push it one more time. e5. Black goes queen g6. Maybe now it's time to develop the two pieces which are still sleeping. So let's get our knight in the game. Knight c3, bishop captures c3, queen captures c3. Knight goes to d8 because it has to defend the king. The knight has to be around the king. Maybe that's what the black player thought. And then you develop again, bishop a3 again. Take a look at this bishop, right? This bishop controls all these vital squares, important squares. Knight h6, and then it's just all game over. Just take a look at white's position. The black's king cannot castle and all of that. Again, just an example. It is completely okay to sacrifice some pawns if you need a lead in material. And development is important. Why? Because that's the most important thing. We need to activate our pieces. If your pieces are sleeping, you definitely cannot win in chess.